next speaker, José Caraballo Cueto, completed his PhD in economics at the New School for Social Research in 2012, where he specialized in econometrics, a statistics field, and development, obtaining honors in the latter. He had several presentations in academic conferences in different countries. Two of those presentations were at the United Nations, where he presented a new way of measuring civic engagement in 2012. And during the second time, he analyzed the economic development of the Dominican Republic in the International Day of Poverty Eradication in 2013. He was awarded a fellowship from the Global Foundation for Democracy and Development, based in New York, and other grants to study development-related topics. Caraballo currently works as an assistant professor of statistics at the University of Puerto Rico at Cayey, where he is also a regular researcher in the Institute for Interdisciplinary Research and the director of the Census Information Center. In the CIC, he has access to a comprehensive database on several socioeconomic aspects of Puerto Rico. Dr. Caraballo is the general coordinator of the first Human Development Report on Puerto Rico, a multi-sectoral research project done in tandem with the United Nations. He also was a statistical project manager in the Puerto Rican Institute of Statistics, where he was chair of the subcommittee of economic statistics and was in charge of many of the related projects. He is a member of several academic associations and has published a book, several peer-reviewed articles, and more than 60 op-ed essays in Puerto Rico and in other international outlets. Please help me to welcome him to our gathering today. His topic, by the way, will be the Great Depression of Puerto Rico, causes and possible solutions.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, Professor, for that presentation. Puerto Rico is currently in its Great Depression, and I call it like that because if we compare this depression with the depression of the 1930s, this one is longer and deeper. The one that we have in the 1930s, where Puerto Rico was so dependent in the sugar production that we didn't experience such a huge decrease in production as we are doing right now. Just to have an idea, the size of the economy, which is the gross national income, adjusted by inflation, which is the way that we should compare figures in time, equals the size of the economy of 1999. The public debt represents over 98% of the size of the economy. More than 270,000 of jobs have been lost from the beginning of the Depression in 2006 to 2015, and more than 700,000 of Puerto Ricans have migrated in gross terms. The average salary is right now, adjusted by inflation, the same as 12 years ago. And it's important to realize that the CLAC, which is the Economic Commission for Latin America, in 2005 published their first report about Puerto Rico, and just before the Great Depression started, they said that the primary problem of the economy of Puerto Rico is a low job creation. Here I illustrate the employment movement in Puerto Rico. I don't use the unemployment rate in Puerto Rico because it's underestimated, but you can see right here the huge decline in the employment proportion in Puerto Rico. Has been stable during the last year in 28%, but it's important to realize that in most of the countries in the world, this ratio is about 55%. Poverty rate increased during this period. It's important to realize that the poverty rate in Puerto Rico was decreasing from the 1950. In the 1950, the poverty rate was about 70%, so it was decreasing throughout that period. But when the depression started in 2006, what we saw is an increase in poverty, and right now is 46%. But it's important also to realize that most of the people that are migrating are not professionals. This is only 15%, close to 15% of the population that is migrating that have at least a bachelor degree. 45% of the people that are migrating, between 40 and 45%, are poor people. So if that people will have not migrate, the poverty rate right now in Puerto Rico will be 54%. So in other words, the majority of the population in Puerto Rico will have been poor right now. And it's important to realize that Puerto Rico doesn't receive parity in Medicaid fundings, and there is no strong economic development project right now in Puerto Rico. Children have the highest poverty rate, close to 56%. And it's important to realize that there are many Head Start centers that are being closed, and there is no earned income tax credit in Puerto Rico. Some people say, well, poverty in Puerto Rico is overestimated because people underestimate their income. It's interesting that Dr. Eileen Segarra, which is a professor of economics, measured poverty multidimensionally. And she found even more people when she looked at 11 indicators than when we just look at income. It's important also to realize that the poverty rate in Puerto Rico is not distributed evenly when you look across counties. So if you are in the metropolitan area next to Guaynabo City, you can have a poverty rate of 25%, 28%, but if you move to Adjuntas or Ciales, which is in the countryside, poverty rate goes up to 62%. So, and you're going to see at the end of my presentation why. And it's important to realize that when the Section 936 was removed, the impact of that deindustrialization was huge in the countryside because most of these factories were located in the countryside, not in the metropolitan area. So when these industries closed, it was like throwing an atomic bomb in many of these small counties. Income inequality also have increased during this period, not because the rich people are becoming richer, which is something that is happening in the US and in many industrialized countries, but because the poor people have suffered more this Great Depression than the rest of the classes. So the poor people is becoming poorer. And just to give you an idea, the top 10% in Puerto Rico earn close to 33 times more than the poorest 10%. And what we're going to see in the middle of this depression and the measures that are being taken is an increase in income inequality, because what they're putting is they already have established a lot of regressive taxation. The public services have been decreased so far, but with these measures of the control board, what we're going to see is an increase in this income inequality. And it's also important to realize that the income inequality in Puerto Rico is among the top 5 in the world. You have heard that there is a debt crisis in Puerto Rico, and some of you have heard that that's because of corruption. The point is that the debt to GNI, or debt, a measure of debt relative to the size of the economy, decreased from the 1970s to the 1990s. So if the point is, if corruption is a determinant, then you have a problem here, because we have corruption in Puerto Rico since Christopher Columbus arrived. So what happened that we see that the debt skyrocketed at the end of the 1990s up to the 2015? Well, you're going to see it right here. You see the huge decline of the manufacturing employment in Puerto Rico. Half of the economy of Puerto Rico is manufacturing. And that created by the removal of the Section 936. What actually happened is that the economy was destroyed, the economy collapsed after those tax incentives were removed, and no alternative economic plan was provided at the federal level or at the state level. Nobody's actually thinking right now, at least in the government, about what is going to be the new economic development plan. Some people said that the problem of this indebtedness is a giant government, but it's important to realize that when we don't have any debt problems in the 1970s and the 1980s, the proportion of government employment were even higher than right now. And actually, that's the gray line that you have at the top. And also you can see that in the last years, there is a huge decline in the government employees while the debt continued to increase. So here, that line, that black line, which is the real debt, is debt adjusted by inflation. So either if I put it over the size of the economy, or if I adjust it by inflation, I just see a similar pattern, which is a decline in debt from the 1970 to the 1990, and then a huge increase. So when the economy collapses, you have an economic crisis, then the government revenues decrease, and this is what you see here. This is the tax revenues of the general fund of the central government, adjusted by inflation again. I cannot compare $1 in 2015 with $1 in the 1990 because of the difference in the price level. So everything, every monetary figure I have to adjust it by inflation, and that's not something that many people do, including journalists. So there's an economic crisis, create a fiscal crisis, and what the government did to replace these tax revenues that were not received because there is an economic crash, what they did is actually to issue a lot of debt. And it's important to realize that those tax revenues decline even though we are paying proportionally more taxes. We never had a sales tax before 2006. Now, in 2006 was 7%. Then those sales tax increased to 11.5% in 2015, 2014, I don't remember right now. And also, they put a tax to U.S. manufacturing in Puerto Rico. And even with those three measures, and many others that we had in Puerto Rico, you can see that the tax revenues are not even close to the pre-crisis level. And as Professor Duani said, if you have more migration, the tax base decrease, and you're going to have even lower tax revenues. So the recurrent recipes in Puerto Rico are just, the orthodox standard neoliberalist measures. They approved in this year a labor market reform, saying that the problem of the unemployment in Puerto Rico is not that there is no economic plan. The problem is that there is a lot of labor protections. Labor standards in Puerto Rico are so high, and we need to decrease those to create employment. But the experience that we had before with labor market reform in Puerto Rico, we don't see when we measure. I know that there's a lot of ideology behind all this. But when we measure, we don't see a lot of job creation every time that they remove fringe benefits in the early 2000s to the part-timers, or when they remove the extra salaries that was provided with the closing law. We didn't observe an increase in job creation. So I'm not sure if every time that we have a recession, we have to lower benefits. Some people said, including the Kruger report, that the problem in Puerto Rico is that the minimum wage. We are applying a federal minimum wage. That is a minimum wage of a rich country in a middle income country such as Puerto Rico. But the truth is that that premise is departing from the assumption that the U.S. already has an optimal minimum wage. So if the U.S. were to have an optimal minimum wage, then I can say we cannot apply the optimal minimum wage of the U.S. in Puerto Rico. But many of you will agree that $7.25 is not the optimal minimum wage of the U.S. And actually, the unemployment rate, the lowest unemployment rate that we had in Puerto Rico was in 1969, and was a state minimum wage of $1.10. That minimum wage of 1969 in Puerto Rico was actually higher than the current $7.25. And I published an academic article recently about this, and what I suggest, based on advanced statistics, is that the minimum wage in Puerto Rico should be right now about $8.61. The control board, and I put it in capital letter because if it has veto power, it is not an oversight board, it's a control board. It's going to increase poverty, something that happened in DC. They're going to lay off a lot of government employees, but in the private sector, you will also realize that this is going to have a multiplier effect in the private sector. In particular, when we measure the interconnection between sectors, if the government lay off about 100 employees, the private sector is going to lose 55 employees. We are now under a very deep austerity program, and not even the IMF agree with that right now. In 2016, the last year, the IMF published a report saying that if there is a depression and you implement austerity measures, what you're going to have is an even deeper depression. We're going to observe more migration. That's what happened in Detroit when Detroit has their fiscal control board. And it's important to realize that Promesa even mentioned the phrase economic development in the whole 88 pages. So what are the proposals, not to burn ourselves here with all this that I have said? The first thing is that the U.S. have to recognize that they have a shared responsibility with the crisis of Puerto Rico. So if you go to Puerto Rico, some people are going to say that the crisis was created by the political class of Puerto Rico. And so if you go to the diaspora, many people are going to say that the crisis was created by the federal laws applied to Puerto Rico and by colonialism. My position is that both are responsible for this crisis, and the U.S. have to recognize that, and they have not recognized. And if you see Promesa, it's just saying that this is a problem of corrupt politicians, and we also have corrupt politicians, and corruption was an exacerbating factor, but was not the primary factor. And I wrote an article about that using advanced statistics, trying to see what are the main determinants of the indebtedness. So one of the responsibility of the U.S. was blocking bankruptcy laws. As you know, they exclude Puerto Rico in 1984 from the Chapter 9, and also they blocked last year the local bankruptcy law. They have blocked our export competitiveness with these navigation acts, which actually cost Puerto Rico from 1971 to 2014. Those navigation acts cost the economy of Puerto Rico $23.4 billion, adjusted by inflation. And also, we are not receiving Medicare parity in Puerto Rico. Every time that you are going to receive a check, especially if you're an employee like me, we are paying Medicare in the same way as in the States, but Puerto Rico doesn't receive it in the same way as in the States. So all of this, and of course, if you see that the U.S. have been always controlling the economic structure of Puerto Rico in the way they want to, including with Section 936, you have a responsibility in that sense. So it's important to realize that in just a month later that the Congress approved Promesa, and the Obama signed Promesa, a month later they approved a Brady plan for Tunisia. Brady plan is a way to refinance debt. Tunisia is having a fiscal crisis right now. So what the U.S. Treasury did is to guarantee a new bonds, and those bonds were swapped with the old interest bonds. That Brady plan should be also applied to Puerto Rico, and it's not a bailout. It's a way to what the U.S. is doing is just guaranteeing the new debt. Yes. Sure. We need also a strong economic development tools. When I was presenting something similar to the task force of the Congress, they don't want to hear. Actually, I remember this Congressman Bill Nelson. He said, in this office you cannot talk about navigation acts. So if you're going to talk about that, this meeting is end. And in this way, this task force was just interested in very wishy-washy measures such as, we need to improve statistics in Puerto Rico. And of course, I agree with that. But what we need is very strong economic development tools. For instance, right now, Juan, which is also a colony, it's a territory, right now is in a visa waiver program. So many tourists from many countries do not need to apply to a tourist visa. I said, let's include Puerto Rico in that program so that we can diversify the source of our tourists. I said, no, we're not going to do that. So everything that you propose is no. In the case of Puerto Rico, we need to strengthen a small and medium-sized enterprise. We cannot continue to think, or to depend that some investor comes from some part of the world and save us. We need to start producing. In that way, I calculate that half of the consumption in Puerto Rico will have been in a small and medium-sized enterprise. More than 24,000 of jobs could have been created. We need to export more. Only less than 5% of the local corporation export. So what we have in Puerto Rico is a very small and shy private sector, and we need to increase that, and we need to strengthen these local companies. We need to reestablish fringe benefits for part-timers, because what we are doing right now is promoting working poor. Today, 1 out of every 5 people that work is poor. We need to audit the debt. There was debt that was issued over constitutional limits and under fraud. And right now the government it's just fighting against the court because there is a commission that is trying to audit the debt, but the governor especially, doesn't want that to happen. We need to formalize informal businesses. There are many people that have businesses, especially in the countryside, and also in poor neighborhoods in the metropolitan area. But if they want to formalize their business, the first thing that the government said is, you have been 10 years working as a mechanic in your home. This is your penalty. We need to waive those penalties and to integrate that people into the formal economy. We need to increase agriculture, but I warn people that the agriculture that we need is high value-added agriculture. We cannot think in the old ways with a machete, and the jibaro and la pava. We need to compete with the agriculture of the U.S. and the agriculture of Europe, which is very profitable. For instance, in Puerto Rico, if you want to buy an organic chicken, it will cost you $13, $14. So that's something that Puerto Rico can compete, but we cannot compete with the rise of Vietnam. Vietnam paid 25 cents to their employees per hour. We cannot compete with that, but we can compete with producing guacamole in Puerto Rico. Most of the guacamole in Puerto Rico is imported, while we have many avocados in Puerto Rico, and in that way we need to finish in agricultural products. It's not just to sow, it's also to terminate the product. We need to export more in that sense, and we need to distribute production outside of the metropolitan area. And this is an article that was just accepted that I did, and this is what you see. This is the share of outdoor production per county, and what you see is that 4 counties in the metropolitan area is producing almost 45% of the total production in goods and services in Puerto Rico. So all those counties that are in yellow, they are producing less than 1% of what is being produced in Puerto Rico in terms of goods and services. So that's why the poverty rate is higher in Ciales and Adjuntas. And if you are closer to the metropolitan area, if you are closer to the economic activity, then the probability of suffering poverty is lower. So we need to look at new tragedies and also think in a different way. We cannot think that Puerto Rico is a metropolitan area. We actually need to look at the comparative advantages that different regions in Puerto Rico have, and as I said, try to strengthen more on the local sector in Puerto Rico and stop thinking, especially including universities. You know, most business administration department in Puerto Rico is still thinking that they have to produce managers and administrators and not entrepreneurs. So thank you for your patience.
And our final speaker of the afternoon, who will be addressing the subject of Puerto Rico's final collapse, crisis, and alternatives, is Emilio Pantojas Garcia, a sociologist and senior researcher at the Center for Social Research and professor in the graduate program in sociology at the University of Puerto Rico. He's a specialist in political sociology and economic development of the entire Caribbean basin. He got his BA in Latin American Studies in 1976 and a PhD in sociology in 1983 from the University of Liverpool in the United Kingdom. Became the director of the Center for Social Research, where he served, in which capacity he served from 1994 to 1998, and was director too at the Caribbean Resources Center in 1997 to 2000, and the Graduate School of Business Administration at the University of Puerto Rico from 2006 to 2010. He has also served as president of the Association of Puerto Rican Studies and the Association of Caribbean Studies, a member of the editorial board of the Latin American Research Review put out by LASA, the Latin American Studies Association, as well. He's a Fulbright scholar. He was selected, the Wilbur Martin Visiting Scholar by the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies at Harvard University, and has also delivered courses in international perspectives at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University as well. Would you please help me to welcome him here today?
Thank you. While we set up the PowerPoint, I'm going to sort of pull out the lens. I want to pull out the lens and give you a wide angle. And I asked to be the last panelist because Gloria sent us 3 questions, which I think should be answered before we leave. What are the background causes of the current socioeconomic crisis in Puerto Rico? What forms of resistance are taking now? And what solutions do you propose? And so I wanted to take a shot at that. And originally I wanted to do a comparison between the Kruger plan and the fiscal plan. But I figured, I think if I am the last one, that would have been discussed. And I think that there have been enough discussions about different aspects. I want now to, and so let me show you what it is. We lost my presentation. Good. Oh, there we go.
Just kidding.
That's all right. Not the first time. I can do it extemporaneously, I guarantee you that. But basically, I want to answer those 3 questions, and I want to pull up the lens. Yeah. I wanted to answer the 3 questions. And I want to pull out the lens and give you a sort of wide angle or panoramic view of what we are going to do. So I thought of it as the final collapse. It's the final approach. I spoke of the collapse of Puerto Rico way before the collapse was obvious to someone. And I remember presenting my book, Crónicas del Colapso, in 1984 in Mayagüez, and a professor of economics said to me, "This has not collapsed." And I said, well, if you have a boat in the Marina del Rey, it hasn't certainly collapsed. But if you're a normal human being, it is collapsing. Moreover, I have a Facebook page called Crónicas del Colapso. And there I have 4 essays for you. One, a comparison between Puerto Rico and Greece. Is Puerto Rico, Greece in the Caribbean. The other one is La Gran Depresión de los 2000, which I wrote in 2013, talking about, it was when economists had not accepted that the contraction was a depression. And I said, it's been going on for so long, it is by now a depression. I also have another one on the university, where I make a proposal, rather controversial proposal for university reform. And I also pulled at one this morning, because we've been talking so much about colonization. It's called Colonizados. And it talks about a reflection on Albert Memmi and Frantz Fanon on Puerto Rico, on our condition as colonized people. So, we're talking about the causes of economic collapse. There were 2 causes. One is a structural cause that has to do with global neoliberalism, trade liberalization, the marginalization of Puerto Rico from global value chains, which Caraballo described as the decline of manufacturing. But it was a graver element than that. It is that Puerto Rico is now not connected in any significant or dynamic way to global networks of value chains. And of course, with trade liberalization came the loss of colonial preferences. The other one is indeed corruption. Corruption is not the cause, but it is a significant cause of Puerto Rico's debt crisis. If you remember, because corruption in Puerto Rico doesn't take place in very small, it's not a give me a bag of money kind of thing. Yeah. If you remember, the father of the current governor, Governor Rosselló I, Rosselló I was nicknamed Alibaba, or Alibaba, if you want to say it in English. Why was he Alibaba? Because he developed a scheme, a major scheme. This is not some small petty theft thing. For corruption, he constructed a major coliseum, el Coliseo de Puerto Rico. He constructed el Supertubo. He constructed an urban train. And in all of that, who cost billions of dollars, the collateral was the income from the rates of the train, from the rates of the water authority, from the rates of the Coliseo, of the Choliseo as we call it, because it is after Miguel Agrelot. And every contractor had to give 10% to the party. 10%, the tithe. He was a religious man. He believed that every contractor of the New Progressive Party should give him and his party 10%, like it says in Miqueas 4. Well, this is much worse. I mean, this is a different thing. But then came the conservation projects of Aníbal Acevedo Vila with the IBU. Aníbal Acevedo Vila, the solution, and I wrote an article in 2005 saying the solution to the crisis in terms of the tax reform would have been to increase then, when the bubble was up, property taxes. People were underpaying property taxes. It's called el gran ausente, because they were talking about tax reform, but they were not talking about taxing the properties. There were doctors and entrepreneurs that had $1 million houses, but they were declaring an income of $25,000 because they had a salary assigned from their businesses, and the house was owned by the businesses. So I said the way to catch the tax evaders is through property taxes. Now taxes have lost 40% of their value, and they are going to increase property taxes without reassessing. At that time, they came up with the value-added tax. And what did Acevedo Vilá do with the value-added tax? Instead of paying the debt, he purchased land to preserve for conservation purposes. And of course, these tree hoggers went there and they loved it. And that's good. Only problem is that 3 of these projects that have been uncovered, the land was purchased at 3 times the price. The scheme was very easy, and it was repeated 3 times. You buy some humedal. How do you say humedal?
Wetlands.
You buy some wetlands, mangle por ahí, close to Fajardo. And you say, I'm going to fill it, and I'm going to build a second home project. And of course, all you had to do was call the EPA, because you can only build birds' houses in those places. But no, Acevedo Vilá said, we're going to purchase the land because it is privately owned. And the developers, who happen to have been members of his parties and donors of his party, said, we will oblige if you pay us X amount of money. He ended up paying 3 times, and of course, he got kickbacks. And the third great scheme of corruption came under Luis Fortuño, who, throughout his 4 years, spent $9 billion, the equivalent of 1 year's budget of the government, spent it in contracts to party donors. When you steal 25% of the budget, that is a problem. So corruption was was not the only cause, but it was one of the causes. What were the comparative advantages or the competitive advantages that were deteriorated by the repeal of Section 936 and by the creation of the World Trade Organizations? Those things. The common market was erased. The tax holidays were repealed. And all special preferences, colonial protection, colonial preferences were abolished. Here's a list of all these free trade agreements. But the one that really delivered the final stroke to the Puerto Rican economy was China's accession to the World Trade Organization. One of the key elements that allowed for the development of a drug and pharmaceutical complex in Puerto Rico was the fact that there was a restriction where all medicines consumed in the United States had to be produced in the phytosanitary region of the United States, had to be produced under the eye of the Food and Drug Administration. And of course, the Food and Drug Administration only regulated American territories, including Puerto Rico. When the World Trade Organization was put in place, one of the dispositions was that all companies had to be treated as national companies. That meant that the Food and Drug Administration, if someone wanted to export to the United States, if a subsidiary of a US company wanted to establish in Brazil or wherever and export to the United States, the FDA had to inspect the plant on site. Well, what happened? The Chinese come to the World Trade Organization, and all of the drug companies go where? To China. I was the director of the Graduate School of Business when Merck Company came to us and said, we want to give as a farewell gift to our management an MBA. And we had to design an MBA program for their managers so that they can then leave. And Xanax, who was produced in Puerto Rico, went to China. And now the FDA went to China and certified the plant. And so that's the way Puerto Rico was kicked out. The Puerto Rican economy was kicked out of global value chains. This is an explanation of what happened. And I call your attention to the last part. In 1990, at the height of the 936 economy, Political Risk Analysis, a company that was doing risk analysis, classified Puerto Rico as the #1 competitive jurisdiction in the world because of 936. As soon as 936 was repealed in 1997, Puerto Rico became number 22. The year after, automatically. And then, after 1997, Puerto Rico withdrew from, from the survey and reappeared later in the World Economic Forum, going from 36 to 32 in 2014. And then it has now been kicked out again because we do not provide reliable figures. This is what it looks like by decade, and I put periods. Operation Bootstrap is the first one, the 936 economy is the second one, and the Great Depression of the 2000s, 2006, 2016 is the last part. That's the performance of real GDP. During the Depression, it's a W, they call it a W, it's a crooked W, but it's a W. It's a W depression. It kicked up a little bit in 2012, the election year, because Luis Fortuño, who had robbed everything he could, then decided to lower taxes, and the economy sort of recuperated a little bit, but it just grew by 0.2%, and then it went back down again. This is how employment, and Caraballo showed that, this is how employment behaved, but this is how employment has behaved through, and this is from a friend of mine called David Martin. This is not just, this is employment during the crisis, and these are the policy interventions. The 936 expires, the EVU, Law 73, Law 154, Laws 20 and 22, the new employment law and the EVU agrandado, that's the EVU to 11%, and nothing. Puerto Rico responds to nothing. If that was a patient and you were giving it resuscitation, not only is flat, no, it's not flat landing, it's going down, it's going to hell. No? So this is Puerto Rico's flat line. It's a declining flat line, if you can imagine that. So what are we doing? What are we doing? Forms of resistance. I am deeply troubled. I am deeply troubled. Why? You have seen it here. People are very, very militant. People are very, yeah, you saw them here yesterday. To me, I commented to someone, it looked a little bit like a Pentecostal church, no? But the problem is that we are all protesting separately. We are the single issue society that protests fragmentedly. Let me give you examples of that. During the EVU protest, everyone delivered a protest to Capitol opposing the IVA, the new value-added tax. But they went in tandems. I remember I was there. I hadn't been to a protest in a long time. So I got up my 70s tennis shoes. Here goes Emilio the militant. Emilio the red card PSP member. I'm going there. And you know what happened? I came at 11, and this was the protest of the private schools, the great schools. And they said, no, the university is coming in the afternoon. You have to go, and I had to walk. They really kicked me out of the protest. I had to go back. I had to go back to Sixto Escobar, about a mile away, to join the protest of the universities. During the university strike, the Apple wanted to support the students, but but the majority of the faculty did not. And so we had a faculty meeting, which was not the Apple meeting. Those are two different things. And in the faculty meeting, the Senate came up with a proposal to have a Congress, a multi-sectoral Congress, to discuss the crisis with the students. And I stood up and I said, okay, so if we all agree that the enemy is the junta, we should finish the Congress by joining the students in the march of protest against the junta. And we passed that one. That was the one who passed. Only problem was that because the students closed the university, the professors did not go to the marcha with the students. I did. I kept my promise. But we were fragmented and it was a very small march by university standards. And then on Monday, I still have my marching shoes on. I mean, I'm a militant now. Where's the junta? I'm going to chew it up and spit it out. I am back to my Come Candelas day. But the only problem is that on Monday, I go to the vigil. I'm a Protestant. In fact, I went to church at noon. And so I go with all these pastors to protest for a vigil. And it was a very small march. So we are protesting separately. We are fragmented. And you can be an optimist. I am not a pessimist. Do I look like a pessimist? Do I speak like a pessimist? But the fact of the matter is that I am a sociologist. And not only that, I am an old sociologist who lived through the 70s and who lived through the time when we thought that there was such a thing as a Puerto Rican revolution.
Yes. That's right.
The students, they said, there is something new about our protest. We're going to have a concert. That was in Twitter, because I am an old man in Twitter. There's nothing, well, you can judge by the president. Nothing worse than that. And I said, in 1970, Roy Brown had a concert at UPR called Yo Protesto. So there is nothing new about concerts and protests. Forgive me. You need to learn history. Bad idea to have someone like me on Twitter. And then there is a disaffiliation from the major political parties, and that is good. But that disaffiliation did not take the form of voting for the parties of the working class and of independence. The parties of both parties got less votes than ever. And who got the vote? El Senador Chaco Vargas Vidot got the most votes anywhere. And Alexandra Lugaro got 174,000 votes. These people have no political project. These people have a voice, they have a stance, and they're doing great things. But there is not a political project of transformation. And that is what I mean when I said that we are in an era of fragmented, single-issue protest movements. Finally, what are the possible solutions? And these are not easy. It is much easier said than done. I am speaking on the first part. I am speaking as an expert on development. This is what I do. I know economic development as a sociologist, and I'm an expert on economic development. And this is what people prescribe. So I'm using some of that. Tourism has actually been one of the salvation elements in Puerto Rico in terms of creating employment, in terms of expanding the market. But as Caraballo pointed out, that happens mostly in San Juan and in tourist centers. Sports is another area of potential growth and linking and repositioning into global value chains. Clothing and design. Puerto Rico has a burgeoning industry of clothing designers, very, very posh, very chic. They go to New York. But this is for the rich people, of course. This is nothing to do with the poor. And then the other thing that they have done is finance and real estate with Law 20 and 22, which are really a way of liquidating inventory, but that's not going to go anywhere. The more interesting things are, for example, the development of medicinal cannabis. Cannabis. Is that the way pronounced? Cannabis? Cannabis. Okay, thank you. I'm confused between the two languages. So, yeah, but this is not, don't get excited, this is not for enjoyment. This is medicinal cannabis. Remember, I'm a Protestant, no? No. But there are other alternatives. For example, Chocolate Cortés has established a cafe, a chocolate establishment, and they are hiring Puerto Ricans, they're paying Puerto Ricans to cultivate cocoa. And this is high quality cocoa, but it's a niche. The same is happening with gourmet coffee. Puerto Rico imports 90% of the coffee. But there are gourmet coffee. If you want to drink real nice Puerto Rican coffee, you gotta put up $8 an hour a pound, or $10 a pound for Puerto Rican coffee. It's very good, but it's very expensive. I took some to my friends in Germany, and I said, this is the coffee that the Pope drinks. And it was certainly heavenly, but it cost me $14 each for 6 ounces, no? Which is okay. And then, of course, things like Rums of Puerto Rico, but these are niches. These are niches. And the agriculture, the other day I saw people saying, let's go into agriculture. Yeah, fine. I want to see all these young people arrancando batatas in a talud somewhere for a month. The fact of the matter is that you have to develop a strategy. You have to develop a strategy, and that strategy has to do with niches, has to do with linkages to tourism. A $13 chicken is not going to sell like crazy everywhere, but you can develop a niche for tourists, all those organic tourists or those healthy people that go to Puerto Rico. But you need to develop that market. Finally, I wanted to make a comment I was made yesterday about Cuba being a model. Cuba has been hit as hard as Puerto Rico by neoliberalism. First of all, the port of Mariel, which is the commercial port of Cuba, is run by an APP, by a public-private corporation. The port of Havana has become a tourist port, and my Cuban colleagues from the University of Havana were celebrating this. And I told them, do you know what's going to happen to Havana? And Havana is becoming the Havana of Hemingway. Yeah, it is becoming, Havana used to be the brother of the Caribbean. Well, it's going back to that. Is that what we want? Is that economic development? Is that sustainable development? We need to understand what is happening globally. This is what I say, global neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is not a faith. Neoliberalism, as it was said yesterday by one of the students, it's a political project. And that political project has two key axes: market fundamentalism and individualism.
Yes.
And those are the building blocks for the analysis. Neoliberalism is not a religion, nor is either a demon. It is a phenomenon, and it is a strategy to restructure the world, and it started with the Trilateral Commission in the 1980s. This has been brewing for a while, and if we're going to confront it, we need to organize, we need to articulate a political project, and we need to articulate resistance. But we have to go beyond resistance. We have to go to active combat. And I am not calling anyone to arms, but we need to devise a strategy that goes beyond resistance. It is nice to resist. It is beautiful to resist, but we need to do something. I am a doer. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to. I want to begin by first extending our thanks to each and all of our panelists for these terrific presentations, detailed and encompassing in scope. On top of that, I'd like to congratulate them because they all stuck to the time. So as a result, we have a fairly generous chunk of time for questions and conversation. We have a mic that will follow where they see someone with a question, and you can address the questions to either the entire panel or an individual member of the panel. Floor is open. Adi? Oh, she got him.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Jesus Abello. I'm a
Can you-
microbiologist. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Jesus Abello. I'm a microbiologist. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Jesus Abello. I'm a microbiologist. I obtained my PhD at Amherst. I specialize in genetic engineering and climate change. My question is to the economist Dr. Caraballo and to the sociologist. I find very interesting that you talk a lot about organic agriculture and exportation. However, in recent times in Peru, Colombia, there being a lot of water affecting the regions. Chile, there's been a lot of fire. In Puerto Rico, we actually went through our biggest drought in recent years. How do you keep in mind climate change with your models of economic and sociology models? For example, you mentioned that exporting organic produce is interesting, but how do you manage water? How do you manage the infrastructure in Puerto Rico where 60% of the water gets lost? How do you come up with the money? And also, how are you going to sustain medicinal cannabis in a way where you need to get income from the pensions? For example, in Colorado, the income from cannabis comes 25% of the tax is from the recreational marijuana instead of the medicinal marijuana, which is only 3%. How do you combat that? Thank you.
Where's the microphone?
Oh, yeah, they need a microphone.
Wait. No. You should take several questions.
Oh, I'm going there. So
Ellos pueden ir a este y tú sigues allá.
All right, thank you for your question. Yeah, I agree that global warming is a reality and it should be faced. It's a global phenomenon. So Puerto Rico is constrained by what is happening at the global level. So what I have read from experts such as the former director of the EPA in Puerto Rico is that we need to use more used waters. Most of the problem in Puerto Rico, not just in farming, but across most of the industries and sectors, is that local business have a very primitive way of producing. Yeah, and that's also is happening in farming. They are using drinking water to sow. And one of the things that this former director that have wrote a lot about it is that we need to use more used water to produce, not just because of global warming, but because it's cheaper, it's profitable. But we need to provide greater capacity to our local entrepreneurs so that they know how to use more sophisticated way. And there are ways to do it, but not doing anything is not an alternative. And it's important to point out that Puerto Rico have many space to cope with this and to come out with a new development plan and to cope with the constraint that is facing. But not doing anything is not an option.
Given the time constraints that eventually will come on us, I'm going to ask for 3 questions in a row, and then we'll answer them all in a sequence.
There are 2 things about drought. First of all, drought is not new to Puerto Rico. The first year I came back to Puerto Rico from the United States, I was a migrant. There was a drought, 1994. And one of the things that we realized is that drought in Puerto Rico is not just the lack of rainfall, but it's also the mismanagement of water. And so, aside from reusing water, filtering water and reusing it, the other element is to improve on the reservoirs. Reservoirs are filled with sediment. So, and in fact, the American, we always bring an American to tell us what to do and what's the problem. He said that he described it more as a social drought than as a natural drought. The tropics have droughts, cyclical droughts, and what we need to do is to understand them and manage them. But I want to make a different point in terms of developing cannabis or other small industries. These are niches. And we need to develop regional as opposed to national. I mean, the Puerto Rican market is just too small. We need to develop regional alliances. There are other countries. One of the things that I've been proposing since the 1990s, is making Puerto Rico into the sort of commercial center of the Eastern Caribbean. They don't have Walmart. They don't have because of the size of the market. They don't have Costco or Sam's, and you see all these Eastern Caribbeaners migrating. I don't promote a visa waiver plan because we are in the Caribbean, and the Americans believe that we are the gateway for illegal migration. But what I did propose, since most of the Eastern Caribbeaners that already come to Puerto Rico to do their shopping, their Christmas shopping, their back to school shopping, what I proposed was special visas, tourist visas for these people, pre-qualifying them on the basis of income, so that to know that these people are not potential migrants. And also, my proposal was to move it to Ponce. In Ponce, there is an airstrip that will accommodate easily small planes, 44, those Dash 44 planes, and you could develop packages for these people, for these brothers and sisters on the islands, on the Eastern Caribbean islands, to come to Puerto Rico and spend a weekend doing shopping, or spend the middle of the week doing shopping, and you do the hotel, and you do entertainment, and you do the whole shebang, as they say. But I figured let's do it in Ponce, because Ponce needs development instead of bringing them to San Juan. As it is happening, most of these people, and there is a significant amount of them, if you go to Costco during Christmas, you'll find vans with people from the islands and another van to put the drums where they put the things that they buy.
Okay, we'll take 3 in, one there, and this. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. If you allow me a moment of levity, we are having here a kind of record in the sense that I think that in the history of Protestant religion, this is the first time that we have an evangelical promoting medicinal cannabis and drugs. Just a moment of levity. First question. I haven't seen any proposal about solar energy on the island. I would like to see what you have to say about that. We know about the backward almost the yoke of the aeolic with the wood wings that are still without being fully operational on the island. So that's a question. What do you have to say about proposal involving solar energy? The other question, and I would like all of you to say something about this. I think that we are dealing in Puerto Rico with an elite-defined but ingrained sense of impunity. People basically plunder the island without major consequences. We don't have any prison in Puerto Rico after all the acts of plundering. We only have one prisoner, Jorge Font, who is minor player. Only the federal authorities, only the federal authorities go there to Puerto Rico and Pam. So my question is the following, just to give you some example. The Corredor del Noroeste, as you mentioned, Emilio, according to the original appraisal done by a private company in 2008, was that the land were probably valued at 4 million. The government paid 35, close to 35 million. And we are not talking about only one administration. We are not talking only about Acevedo Villar. The administration of Acevedo Villar made a payment. The administration of Fortunio made other payments. The administration of Garcia Padilla made a payment. So it is a political culture of corruption, shared corruption that they enjoy and wallow in the dirt. We had the investigation of the energy company. We had the contract with the woman, don't remember her name. Donahue, who was getting millions of dollars from Puerto Rican taxpayers. She basically did nothing to make arrangement for better payments or better terms for the Puerto Rican government. And we had the investigation that the utility company was using some legal petroleum as a part of a scheme also of corruption. So is there any way in which taking advantage of the crisis in which we are, if there is any way in which accountability may come knocking the door of the people who are responsible for the situation in which we are now?
Okay,
No, there was me.
no. Yeah, him and then, y entonces a ti.
Okay. Well, I would like to strongly object to the representation that Pantojas does of this view of the crisis, because I don't see the human, and I don't see, let's say, identification between human beings in your scheme and your explanation. So yesterday I referred to concerts in the middle of protests, and the value of humanity and intersubjectivity is something that is extremely important to think when you think of resistance. Not because we want to produce something that is our own, but we want to be able to produce ourselves and to share our selfhood with others in a kind fashion. This may sound like a religious response to the religion of neoliberalism, but it's not. It's rather secular. So I would like to insist in thinking of the human. When I think of Duani's presentation, I think of the exchanges that take place between the island and the diaspora and the entanglement of people and culture of different sedimentations. And I think, what is the human culture that is being produced in those settings? What are the books that are being read, translated? What are the films? What are the documentaries that circulate? How do they circulate? And how do we recreate ourselves with each other in the middle of a crisis? How do we set the parameters for our own culture to be produced in the best way? And in that regard, I think Liliana Coto's presentation was extremely powerful because it cites those places, not only as a space, but also at the type of human-to-human exchange. So again, I just want to offer that as a reflection and as a response as well from the audience. But I do appreciate your presentations. Thank you.
Okay, and the last question before turning it over to the panel.
I have different questions for each one of you. And Doctora Liliana, I'm interested in hearing, there's been a lot of talk on the economics and sort of maybe following your thread there a little bit. And so my question for you is around economic development and public spaces, el rescate de tierras. And what do you see the role of public space development in economic development, where architecture, history, the arts, what role is that playing or could play in those niches or yes, and in Puerto Rico? The reason I'm talking about that is because one of the things that I heard a little bit of, but we didn't talk about, I believe, in my opinion, right, is that and this question goes with you, José, Dr. José, it is, what do you believe is in the invisible hand that has that indirect or unintended benefit to the United States to keep their hand in Puerto Rico? And perhaps, Dr. Pantojas, you could answer a little bit of that also. Because I'm like always thinking, why do they have their hand? Why don't they let us go, period? The other thing that I was, and Señor Pantojas, the question for me around that also is, Emilio, okay. Emilio, una de las cosas que a mí me impacta siempre en Puerto Rico es que yo siendo de Guayama, a nosotros nunca nos llegaban los chavos ni para arte en las escuelas. Se quedaban en San Juan. And the presentations there showed a lot of information on where the development of exportation and importation and all of that is happening in the island. So I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about that. The other thing is, I keep thinking of fishermen and the reasons why in Puerto Rico we're not talking more about that sector and how the laws have impacted that.
Okay, can we hold it there?
Yeah.
Because we've got a lot of questions now, and there's going to be, we're running out of the other end of time. So I'm going to ask that the responses in the aggregate not exceed 10 minutes, because otherwise they will be running into the keynote address. So.
Your question was about how do spatial occupation. Okay, your question was about spatial occupation and economic development.
Yes.
So, well, one of the things that, you know, after Emilio's presentation, I was devastated in the sense that I was talking about such micro experiences and about, you know, people that are aware of those things, but unless we have a sort of university of social movements where these type of intellectuals would be there to exchange knowledge with those other, you know, be it their students, agricultural people, etc., in order to be able to do all this macro politics. Because according to what Roberto said, who does those policies at this point? You have pointed out from Muñoz Marín on, they are all being people that are gaining from the colony, but they are also colonized people. And one of the issues that these groups that are in Puerto Rico now, that they are aware of the macro thing, but also they are dealing with the fact that they have to do activities in order to deal with that area of our lives, which is the internal, as in Vamos they say, we have to deal with the internal colonized person that we have inside us. And all these big proposals, they have to be done, Emilio, within the context of the workshops in the strike, because the students are looking for knowledge in order to be able to discuss those issues with La Junta. But if we discuss them among ourselves, they are never going to learn that much. And in that sense, it's not a question of looking at it from an unrealistic position. I think that there is the vision, there is number one, the need to talk person to person, and that you see it in Vamos, even though Vamos is a group that is of people that I would say that are in their 40s. You see it in Jornada, in their 30s and their 40s, and you see it in Campamento, which are 25, 26. These are people that are not in the high levels of government. They are not, as people in the Jornada, they say, we know that we cannot go we cannot go up in the social ladder. We don't have that option. We don't have that option. The only option that we have is, like one of them said, to put our bodies in the struggle. And they put their bodies in the struggle. That's why they have decided to concentrate in direct action. But that doesn't mean that they are not talking about the possibilities of becoming a wider organization with a strategy also. Because another thing that I want to say is that, this, not only the students, but the organizations here, they are talking about long-term strategy. For instance, Vamos is talking about the 15-year strategy. A 15-year strategy which is oriented towards a change, a paradigm change. And I am going to end that I am not saying that they are free of contradictions, because with the same tone that they talk about the long-time strategy and the paradigm change, they don't give enough attention to popular education, to a systematic approach to that process of popular education, which the younger people are doing. And it's not a question of idealizing the younger people, it's just because I go there and I offer myself, I offer my services, and free. And they don't use it because they have this vertical view of what politics are. And I am talking just about these groups. I am not talking about other groups because I talk only about the groups that I go to. So in that sense, I think that there is a possibility, but I wasn't able to talk about the University of Social Movements, where we could get together and we can get all this knowledge and we can exchange knowledge between them and us and them. And then in that sense, I think that we're going to decolonize the internal colonized person that we have within.
So I thank for all of you for your questions. Yes, I'm not an expert in energy. That's a particular branch within economics, energy economics. But I do have heard many proposals for solar energy in Puerto Rico. And I agree with them because if we look at what is happening in Peñuelas, this way of producing energy right now in Puerto Rico is expensive and it's also polluting. So when you include the health cost to that energy cost, it's a very high cost. So in that sense, when we talk about energy in Puerto Rico, we should also include the health costs, especially because we are a very small country. It's not the same if you are, Brazil and you put a plant very far from all the communities and nobody's being polluted. And I believe that right now there is an opportunity for some solar energy to be developed because we have a huge blackout. This year or last year? Last year, and we're going to have more than that because the infrastructure of PREPA is very weak. So, but I think that, we need to continue educating people because, for instance, even in my house, to bring this at the micro level, we're thinking what are we going to do if there's another blackout. So most of the neighbors of me are they are just looking for power plant. And I said, no, the power plant is so expensive as you know, as looking for solar energy, and also you can use it throughout the whole month, not just in the blackout. So I think that if we continue to educate people about this and we take advantage of a very sad situation, which is these blackouts and the weak infrastructure, we're going to have more opportunity there. And I want to comment about these things of corruption because I know that, for instance, in the media, they love to talk about corruption because corruption is something that sells. If you go with a serious analysis, they say, oh, that's too boring. I'd like you to talk about how many thieves we have in the government. We always have thievers in our government, and the U.S. have a lot of, actually when I was looking right now at the corruption index in the world, and the U.S. is not in the it's not in the top list, and have a growing economy, and you see, so corruption is everywhere, and I don't believe it's a determinant for the debt problem that we have. It's a determinant for other things, for lack of democracy, for the perhaps the income inequality that we have, because we have oligarchy in Puerto Rico that is benefit from all this corrupted class. But what I have to be cautious with this is, as I said to one of my friends, he's actually a Marxist, and we were talking with Agustin about this the other day. Some people say, well, the problem is corruption, both at the left and in the right wing. So what is coming next? Well, the control board, because if you said that the local manager, there is nobody in Puerto Rico that know how to manage, and they are all corrupted. So what is coming next is the control board. So I believe that the control board is actually going to increase corruption, and you can see that as Roberto was saying in the case of Prepa with Donahue. Donahue was imposed from the market because they say, well, we need somebody from this list of managers. You have to pick one. They said that to Prepa, and that's how Donahue came to Puerto Rico. So I believe with this control board, we will not have resolved the corruption thing. I believe that the solution for ending corruption, not just in Puerto Rico, but in the U.S. and in many other places, is civic engagement. When I was working in the United Nations, we correlate a lot measures of civic engagement against corruption, and that's what we see. The countries that have a lot of civic engagement everywhere in the government, they have lower levels of corruption. And that's something that we have to be always claiming, to integrate communities and people within the board of directors of every agency in Puerto Rico, and to increase, in that sense, their engagement with decision making. About why the U.S. don't give independence, it's interesting with this thing of the control board. You know, people that believe in statehood in Puerto Rico said that the path to statehood is the control board, and people that believe in independence also said the same thing, that that's the path to control board, to independence. I believe that the decision of Sessions yesterday is just stating that they would like to keep the colony forever, if we allow it. So I believe that they do have economic interest in Puerto Rico, especially using as a tax holiday for many people in the finance sector. And I don't believe that, and this is something that nobody of you asked, but I just want to say because it reminds me what I've heard from both sides in Puerto Rico. I don't believe that the control board is going to resolve or is going to bring us next to the solution of the status.
I'll be quick. I stand because I like to look at your faces. Two things. I'm either a crusty old man or a pro-cannabis evangelical. That's good. Pick your choice. If you want to read what my understanding of colonialism and sensitivities are, there are two articles that I just published in 80 Grados. One is called La Patria Light, and the other one is called Colonizados. The one on Colonizados I put on Crónicas del Colapso. The question is, we're talking about policy, and we're talking about transforming the economy and the policy. And I am not an individualist, I am not a nominalist. I believe that social transformation takes place by classes, class conflict, social struggles. And this does not begin in an individual. I just came from a service where they reminded me that the Roman Empire killed a guy who looked for justice and equality and freedom. So, I'm very sensitive. But I think that the problem is another one. The problem here is, I agree that corruption is not the problem. The problem is bad governance. And corruption is one of the issues within governance. And the problem that we have is bad governance. If corruption was not a problem, why does the board, does the junta, not want to audit the debt? Because there are two thieves inside it. And so it is a problem. But, it's part of governance. Of course, it's not a single problem. I don't like single issues. I'm not a single issue person. Fishing and the arts. I was told I do Caribbean economic development, and I do Caribbean economic development, and I posed a question to an environmentalist friend of mine. He's a biologist, a marine biologist, at the National University of Colombia, San Andres. And he told me, believe it or not, Emilio, within the Caribbean is a desert, an oceanic desert. There are oases in the desert. There are places in the Caribbean where you can find an abundance of fish, but the Caribbean as such does not have an abundance of fish. There are areas, there are reefs, there are specific areas. He said to me, the seas that gives you the most fish in terms of commercial global fishing are the North Sea and the South Sea, Chile and Alaska. That's where the abundance is. That's what he told me. I'm just relying. And on the question of independence, why won't they let us go? No one gives you something that you haven't asked for or demanded. I mean, empires don't just give up land. Empires respond to social struggles. And the majority of Puerto Ricans do not even vote for independence. So, but in fact, last May and June, 2 articles came out, one in the Boston Globe and one in the USA Today, from conservative think tanks, from professors in conservative think tanks, telling that independence was a possible alternative, a possible solution to the insolvency of Puerto Rico. So there are people in the conservative think tanks, the Mercatus think tank and Brown University, thinking about it.
Would you please check this bibliography? The 3 last ones are instruments for popular education that I would like to share with you. And the next one, would you please sing the next one? The next one. The next one, if you want to check on the organization that I've spoken of, you have, all of them have websites. And at the end, De La Nada, Tripleta in YouTube, it's another way of doing ideological struggle. So these are things that you can use for popular education.
Okay, we've run out of time, so I'd like us to thank again our panel and thank all of you for coming and those who asked questions as well.